Governor Pritzker, for the first time, calling for the removal of President Trump from office.
This on the same day the president said dangerous cities like Chicago should be used as training grounds for the military. Political reporter Chris Ty here now with all that and new details on the 100 military troops the president wants to send to Illinois. Chris?
Joe and Erica, even for two politicians that are political enemies and who spar regularly, this day stands out from the rest. You'll hear what they said here in a second. As for what troops are headed here, the likeliest will be from the Illinois National Guard, which insiders say Governor Pritzker has control over.
From Washington,
we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military, because we're going into Chicago very soon.
To Chicago.
Suggest that you're going to arrest people or that people don't deserve to be U.S. citizens when they are, just because they oppose the President of the United States.
Welcome to Dr. John Daily Podcast. So this is happening right now. There's no real resignation deadline. That's viral exaggeration. But the underlying situation is real. 180 plus House members have co-sponsored impeachment articles. Democrats have outlined 3 removal routes. Senators have invoked the 25th Amendment, and Trump himself has warned his party that losing the House means impeachment. Those are not fictional constructs.
I mean, the bar for something like this, the 25th Amendment, it is very high, extremely high, of course, as it should be. We're going to talk about that because I'll tell you, this may just be one big liberal pipe dream. Joining me right now, attorney Misty Maris. She's here on set. It's good to see you, Misty. Explain the 25th Amendment and why the standard is indeed so high.
The standard is high because it's not just to be used because you don't agree with somebody. It's not to be used because you don't agree with how they're communicating their message. It's to be used when the President of the United States has complete incapacity to fulfill the duties of the office. The reasoning behind the 25th Amendment is key here. It was in contemplation of JFK, horrible situation. What if he had survived but had severe brain damage? Some sort of physical incapacity that would make him unable to fulfill his duties as president. That's what we're talking about. Not just, well, we don't really like what you're saying, so we want to.
Those are documented facts, and they represent the most serious congressional removal pressure against a sitting president in modern American history. Let me walk you through exactly what is happening and why the word cornered is actually accurate, just not in the way the viral videos are presenting it. The most significant documented data point is also the simplest. More than 180 House members have co-sponsored impeachment articles against Donald Trump. That is not speculation. That is not a poll or a projection. That is actual members of Congress who have formally affiliated themselves with impeachment articles in the most official congressional format available. And then there was the December vote. 140 members voted against tabling impeachment articles in a Republican-controlled House. Think about what that means. 140 members voted to advance impeachment rather than bury it. Those are real members making real procedural choices on the official record. The combination of 180 plus co-sponsors and a 140-member vote to advance is the most precisely documented measure of where congressional accountability pressure actually stands. Now let me tell you about the formal House Democratic memo. This is not a press release. This is not a social media post. This is an official congressional document that lays out 3 specific constitutional mechanisms for presidential removal: resignation, impeachment, and conviction, and the 25th Amendment. That memo is the most institutionally significant expression of documented removal pressure available. It represents formal congressional thinking about the most consequential constitutional question facing the current presidency, and it identifies 3 distinct pathways, each with its own procedural requirements, each being actively discussed at the most formal level of congressional activity. The 25th Amendment invocation from Senator Ed Markey and other prominent Democrats adds a Senate dimension to the removal pressure landscape. Markey publicly and specifically called for invoking the 25th Amendment, citing concerns about Trump's fitness to discharge the powers and duties of the office. He acknowledged that the standard is very high and has never been met, but the documented fact that senior senators are publicly calling for this mechanism about a sitting president is itself alarming. It signals that fitness and accountability questions have reached a level of seriousness that produces extraordinary constitutional demands. And then there is Trump's own warning. He has told House Republicans that he will be impeached if they lose the majority. That is the most revealing signal in the entire entire documented removal pressure landscape. When the president himself warns his own party that impeachment is the consequence of losing the House, he is making a specific, internally informed political threat. He is acknowledging his own assessment of how close the documented congressional pressure is to the threshold where it becomes a formal and consequential political reality. Let me break down the 3 constitutional removal pathways so you understand exactly what each requires and where the documented pressure stands relative to each threshold. Resignation is the first pathway. It is the most straightforward procedurally. A president who chooses to resign can do so unilaterally at any time. No congressional vote, no cabinet decision, no judicial action. The resignation pathway is entirely within the president's own control. The documented removal pressure affects it through the political calculation about whether continuation has become more costly than departure. The Nixon precedent is directly relevant. When the combination of documentary evidence, Senate vote mathematics, and Republican leadership communications made continuation untenable, resignation became the rational choice. Impeachment and conviction is the second pathway. House impeachment requires a simple majority of 218 members. The documented 140-member advance vote and the 180-plus co-sponsors represent a pool building toward that threshold on a specific trajectory. Senate conviction requires a 2/3 majority of 67 senators. The documented bipartisan crossover pattern on war powers votes and the accumulated accountability pressure across multiple issue areas create the most grounded foundation for gradual Republican crossover. The midterm electoral dynamic is the accelerant for both the House majority question and the Senate crossover question. The 25th Amendment is the third pathway. It is the most procedurally complex. Section 4 requires the Vice President, a majority of the cabinet, written notification to congressional leadership, and ultimately 2/3 of both chambers to sustain removal if the president contests it. This sequence has never been successfully completed in American history. The honest assessment is that documented congressional pressure is much further from this threshold than it is from the House impeachment majority. The 25th Amendment calls are most important as political signals about fitness concerns from senior Democratic voices, not as realistic near-term procedural predictions. Now let me explain what cornered actually means in this documented context, because understanding that is the key to understanding the entire story. Cornered in the accurate sense means that the documented accumulation of accountability pressure has reached a level where every available escape route has become significantly more costly and more uncertain than at any prior point. The legal escape route through immunity arguments has been constrained by the Supreme Court tariff ruling and the D.C. Circuit immunity ruling. The political escape route through partisan protection has been compromised by documented MAGA-based backlash against officials like Pam Bondi and by bipartisan congressional accountability actions. The financial escape route through complex corporate structures has been constrained by the civil fraud judgment and the court-appointed monitor. The institutional escape route through executive branch control of the accountability narrative has been constrained by documented patterns of officials refusing illegal orders, filing internal memos about improper directives, and communicating through whistleblower channels to Congress. That is what cornered means, not a fictional hours deadline, but a specific documented reality where every exit has been made more costly and more uncertain by the accumulated weight of every accountability development. The midterm electoral dynamic is the most important political variable in the entire documented removal pressure story. The House majority is the single most important structural variable for the impeachment pathway. It determines whether the simple majority threshold is achievable through the existing documented co-sponsor pool or whether it requires additional seats from a midterm majority flip. Trump's own warning about impeachment consequences if Republicans lose the majority is the most revealing signal that the Trump operation understands the House majority as the critical structural variable. Every competitive House district where documented accountability pressures, the Epstein files, the Bondi perjury, the Supreme Court tariff defeat, the financial accountability story are affecting voter assessments of incumbent Republicans is a potential contributor to the majority math. The convergence of every accountability arc into the congressional removal demand story is what makes this moment so significant. Every arc has added pressure. Every documented piece of specific conduct has added to the evidentiary foundation. The Epstein files, the Bondi perjury, and evidence destruction. The Supreme Court setbacks on tariffs, the financial accountability from the fraud judgment and monitor reports, the war powers fights, the judicial contempt proceedings, all of it building the accumulated weight that the congressional removal demand story most formally expresses. Let me give you 4 specific points that summarize everything you need to know. The 3 documented constitutional removal pathways each have specific procedural requirements. The documented congressional accountability pressure is closest to the House impeachment simple majority threshold through the 180-plus co-sponsor pool and the December 140-member advance vote trajectory. It is most distant from the 25th Amendment threshold, whose procedural requirements are the most demanding. The most realistic near-term trajectory points toward the House impeachment threshold as the most approachable constitutional removal mechanism. The documented political landscape includes the 180-plus impeachment co-sponsors, the December 140-member advance vote, Trump's own warning about post-majority flip impeachment, and the midterm electoral dynamic that determines whether thresholds are approaching viability. Trump's own warning is the most revealing signal of how the Trump operation assesses removal risk. The December vote is the most formally documented measure of floor-level impeachment support. The co-sponsor pool is the most specifically quantified foundation for threshold mathematics, and the midterm is the most important political fulcrum. The convergence of every accountability arc into the congressional removal demand story creates the most comprehensive and most specifically grounded expression of accumulated second-term accountability pressure. Every arc adds pressure. Every documented piece of specific conduct adds to the evidentiary foundation. The Epstein files, the Bondi perjury, the Supreme Court setbacks, the financial accountability, the war powers fights, the judicial contempt proceedings, all of it building the accumulated weight that the congressional removal demand story most formally expresses in documented co-sponsor numbers, the December vote, and formal institutional mechanisms. Here is what we need to watch as documented removal pressure continues to develop. Watch the House co-sponsor numbers for any growth beyond 180 toward the 218 simple majority threshold. Watch spring committee hearing activity for any indication that formal evidentiary foundation building for impeachment articles is proceeding on a timeline that supports a possible House floor vote. Watch the midterm electoral landscape for signals that documented accountability pressures are affecting competitive district outcomes in ways that affect House majority mathematics. Watch the Senate Republican crossover pattern for expansion beyond the documented war powers baseline into additional accountability issue areas that build toward the 67-vote conviction threshold. The bottom line is this: there is no official hours deadline giving Trump time to resign or face formal impeachment. But the documented real-world removal pressure, including 180-plus House impeachment co-sponsors, the December 140-member advance vote, the formal House memo on 3 removal pathways, Senator Markey's public 25th Amendment invocation, and Trump's own warning about post-majority flip impeachment, represents the most specifically documented and most formally consequential expression of congressional removal pressure against a sitting president in modern American history. The 3 constitutional removal pathways each have specific procedural thresholds. The documented pressure is most specifically building toward the House impeachment simple majority threshold on the most specific available near-term trajectory. The midterm electoral dynamic is the most specific political fulcrum for the most consequential future accountability threshold changes. And the convergence of every accountability arc we have covered is the most comprehensive and most specifically grounded foundation for the congressional removal demand story. The fictional hours deadline compresses a real and specific process that is genuinely building toward its most consequential outcomes. The documentation is real, the trajectory is specific, and the question of whether it reaches the formal constitutional thresholds is the most important open political question in American governance right now. Cornered in the specific documented sense is the most accurate available characterization of the accumulated accountability landscape. Not cornered in the hours deadline fictional sense. Cornered in the specific sense that every available escape route has been made significantly more costly and significantly more uncertain by the accumulated weight of every documented accountability development. The legal route is constrained, the political route is compromised, the financial route is monitored, the institutional route is leaking, and the congressional removal pressure is building toward thresholds that have never been this close to being reached in the modern history of presidential accountability.